Morning, I'm Diane Macedo. Thanks for streaming with us. In today's update, Attorney General Merrick Garland has announced the Department of Justice will investigate the Minneapolis Police Department. The announcement comes after former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin was found guilty on all counts in the murder of George Floyd. Crowds across the country erupted in cheers as that verdict was announced. And the Floyd family themselves burst into tears as they heard the news. Now the Justice Department will examine whether the Minneapolis Police Department, among other things, has a systemic problem with using excessive force and discriminatory practices. Here's more on that investigation from the Attorney General.
Like so many of you, I have closely watched the events in Minnesota. Although the state's prosecution was successful, I know that nothing can fill the void that the loved ones of George Floyd have felt since his death. My heart goes out to them and to all those who have experienced similar loss. I know such wounds have deep roots, and that too many communities have experienced those wounds firsthand. Yesterday's verdict in the state criminal trial does not address potentially systemic policing issues in Minneapolis. The Justice Department has opened a civil investigation to determine whether the Minneapolis Police Department engages in a pattern or practice of unconstitutional or unlawful policing. The investigation I am announcing today will assess whether the Minneapolis Police Department engages in a pattern or practice of using excessive force, including during protests, and whether its treatment of those with behavioral health disabilities is unlawful. It will include a comprehensive review of the Minneapolis Police Department's policies, training, supervision, and use of force investigations, and whether other mechanisms are needed to ensure constitutional and lawful policing. The challenges we face are deeply woven into our history. They did not arise today or last year. Building trust between community and law enforcement will take time and effort by all of us. But we undertake this task with determination and urgency, knowing that change cannot wait.
And joining me live now from Minneapolis with more on this, we've got Kenneth Morton with us. Thanks, Kenneth. You know, George Floyd's family, we saw their reaction to the verdict. How are they reacting now to this news about the Department of Justice investigation?
We're still waiting to hear from George Floyd's family. As you would imagine, Diane, in the past, less than 24 hours or so, there have been so many emotions going through this family. But we know how they've reacted to any type of calls for reform or investigations into the Minneapolis Police Department, and they're looking for major reforms. They're looking for major change. When it comes to how they feel about any type of next steps or the next chapter, they are welcoming it. They say bring it on, essentially, here, because they say there's still work to do. And so George Floyd's siblings, they have been at the forefront of this, and when it comes to the next steps, they're looking for some accountability, and they're looking for, again, not only change, but drastic change in the Minneapolis Police Department and police departments across this country, Diane.
And Kenneth, that's the family themselves. We know you've also spent a lot of time in Minneapolis, particularly around this case. So what about the city? What's it been like there since this verdict was announced? And how do you expect people there in Minneapolis will react now knowing their whole police department is going to be investigated?
I'm looking down the street below me here, Diane. There are still some businesses that are boarded up, but the city is starting to come back. It's starting to reopen this morning. What we really saw after that verdict was announced was, I've been calling it a bittersweet celebratory moment here. There have been people who've been streaming, a steady stream of people into George Floyd Square at 38th in Chicago, just about 5 miles from where I'm standing here in downtown. They've been wanting to go there to pay their respects. We know that's a time autonomous zone, as they call it, where police have really not been welcome there. Media really not been welcome there as well. But we have seen people going there. There have been memorials there. That is where George Floyd took his last breath, right there at Cup Foods, in front of Cup Foods at 38th in Chicago. So we've seen a lot of people streaming into that area. We saw people outside the courthouse as well. But this city is starting to come back. There was an energy that we felt after the verdict was read. And here, when it comes to how they're responding to this news of a federal investigation to the Minneapolis Police Department, this is what they wanted. They wanted to shine this light on what they say systemic issues with the Minneapolis Police Department here. And we know that when it comes to the police chief, Arredondo, he says that there were a number of reforms that he enacted when he took control of this police department about 3 years ago, but there's still a lot of work to do when it comes to the policies and procedures, the chokeholds, how a suspect is detained. We've seen some high-profile incidents in this city from Muhammad Noor and now Derek Chauvin and George Floyd. And so this city wants to see change. There was talk about disbanding the police department. That didn't happen, but their budget was cut by a small percentage. And the city council and the mayor here, again, promising reforms to the police department, but people, Diane, they want to see change.
And Kenneth, we know the verdict is in, but the whole trial isn't over just yet. Derek Chauvin is set to be sentenced in 8 weeks. What are we expecting to see there?
We're expecting for the prosecution to ask for more than what the judge is likely thinking under current state law. We know that the sentencing guidelines, Diane, that for the second-degree murder charge, unintentional, and also this third-degree murder charge, he could get 12.5 years or so. Potentially for that more serious charge of second degree, it could be 15 years. But we understand in 8 weeks, the prosecution, and we've seen signs that the prosecution plans to ask for a lot more. For that second-degree manslaughter charge, about 4 years. Because when you look at Derek Chauvin's record, he didn't have a record, no criminal record before this incident. And so the family is asking for the maximum. And when we talk about the maximum, we look at the number of years. He's looking at decades here. Something like 40 years is the maximum. It's different degrees. So 40 years for second-degree unintentional murder, 25 years for third-degree murder, 10 years for second-degree manslaughter. Most likely he won't get that, but all eyes will be on what happens inside that court in 8 weeks. Some are calling it the next battle because the defense is obviously going to argue that because he didn't have a previous criminal record there, that he doesn't deserve the harshest sentencing guidelines here, but the state is going to plan. Keith Ellison, the Attorney General, has also indicated that the state will push for quite a few years for Derek Chauvin, and he's being held at a local facility. It's called the Oak Park Heights facility in Stillwater, Minnesota, very close to Minneapolis here. We saw that new mugshot overnight of Derek Chauvin. He was transferred. Many people saw that image of him being led away in handcuffs, an image that so many across the globe who wanted to see since George Floyd took his last breath.
All right, Kenneth Morton for us in Minneapolis. Thanks, Kenneth. And for more on this Attorney General investigation into the Minneapolis Police Department, I want to go now to former NYPD Chief of Detectives and ABC News contributor Robert Boyce. Robert, thanks for being here again. The Attorney General, he just said he's launching this investigation into the Minneapolis Police Department, and they're looking for any unlawful or unconstitutional policing practices. How significant is this probe?
It's going to be a pretty in-depth probe, and they're going to find some things because I looked to the Ferguson Police Department, and they found a discriminatory practice of deployment into minority neighborhoods that other neighbors weren't seeing. So you can see policy review, patterns, practices, procedures, all these things. The patterns, are they discriminatory when they look at things, when they look at arrests, disciplinary procedures. It's a really in-depth investigation, and it's tough for any department to withstand it. Now, if they don't make changes, and I believe they will, the civil penalties will be overwrought, and you have to. So I see big changes coming. I think the Floyd family can expect that. And the Minneapolis Police Department, they had 2 really horrible shootings that I can think of off the top of my head. Floyd and the other fellow who's doing time in jail. So it's really bad there. I see changes. I really like Chief Arredondo. He has made changes. However, this is going to take other steps as well. No more neck restraints. That I see coming down the line as well in any place across the country. If any chief out there is still supporting those, he or she needs to be replaced immediately.
How do you think law enforcement officers and other members of the law enforcement community will react to the news of this probe?
Well, I think if you didn't expect this coming, this is the other shoe falling, if you will. After the criminal trial, you're going to see this. What happened there? What went wrong? And there's nothing wrong with it. It's a good practice to get better, because we're always looking to get better and make changes in our department. So you'll see this. We had this in the NYPD. We have oversight here, looking at our practices and our procedures. There's nothing wrong with it, and we'll take the outside information and make changes as well. It's an ever-evolving world, so I think most clear-thinking police executives will embrace it.
And it seems like there are two goals with an investigation like this. One is to uncover any wrongdoing and obviously fix it, but also to instill more trust in the public, for the public to know that their police departments are doing the right thing, and if they won't, they'll be held accountable. So on that note, I want to take a look with you at the initial report that the Minneapolis Police Department issued right after George Floyd's death. And it says, man dies after medical incident during police interaction. Now, among other issues, it makes no mention of Chauvin restraining Floyd. It only says officers were able to get the suspect into handcuffs, and it noted that he appeared to be suffering from medical distress. Now, knowing what we know now, how significant are some of the omissions in this police report, and how do you fix that in order to instill more trust when the public reads these kinds of reports and there is no video to show us what happened?
So at that juncture, they should have had a death in custody investigation launched immediately. Can't say that it doesn't sound like they did. They just encapsulated it properly, somewhat incorrectly. So once you have a death in custody, you have investigative units to respond. We changed our policy in New York City as well. We've created the Force Division. So the Force unit would come and do an immediate investigation to see what actually happened there by going into body-worn cameras, fixed cameras around in and around the area that was, going and doing canvasses, all sorts of things, looking at the officers if they had any prior incidents where they had or any monitoring lists. So this is what should have happened. You should, a death in custody is treated quite seriously, and it's not something you can just put on a few lines. I don't know if they did that. They should do that, and they will do that going forward, having an immediate response to investigate these incidents of a death in custody.
And in terms of being able to trust what we read in a police report, how important is it for the public to know that, and how important is it to hold the people responsible accountable if a police report doesn't match up with the events that actually happened?
So I think it's important to get the information out so you don't have misinformation going out there. So each police commander in that city should have a Twitter account to put information out, to get in touch with those who are investigating and come together with a group to put information out so you don't have misinformation, which we've seen throughout time. Rumors go around and it gets bad, and people react to those rumors. And it's more often than that, it's not factual. So I think putting out there, getting Twitter accounts, using social media, get information out there, let them know what happened, let them know you took immediate action insofar as the officer's standing, if he's a modified, or if he stayed on there or not, she stayed on there. You have to get that out immediately to be transparent and get the word out that you see it, you acknowledge it, and you're moving forward on it.
So, Robert, in this case, were it not for that bystander video shot by a 17-year-old, do you think that we'd be talking about George Floyd's case today?
I don't know. I don't know if he would have been. Let's put it this way, Diane. I don't think he might not have been convicted without that bystander video. That's today's world. We see it all the time. The handheld phone camera has changed policing. No one does suppression policing anymore. If you do, it's just going to get worse and worse. Investigative policing is the way to go. Precision policing, where you identify certain criminals that are causing the main drivers of crime, and then pursue them. Not this blanket type of policing we call suppression policing. So we've seen changes, and a lot has to do with the camera. I salute it, and I have no problem at all that young girl young woman, I should say, was very courageous in doing so. I think it changed the whole trajectory of the trial itself.
All right. Robert Boyce, we appreciate your time as always. Thank you.
Thank you.
And now that we have a verdict in the trial of Derek Chauvin, some of the key players in that trial are opening up about George Floyd's murder, what they saw that day, and their experience in the courtroom. One of them, Donald Williams, joined Good Morning America for an ABC News exclusive interview. We'll bring that to you after the break. Welcome back. You're looking live now at George Floyd Square in Minneapolis. This is the scene where George Floyd was murdered, now a memorial in his honor. It was also the scene yesterday where people cheered, fists in the air, jumping up and down as the judge read out to the world that the jury found former officer Derek Chauvin guilty on all charges in Floyd's murder. Now, earlier on GMA, Michael Strahan spoke with MMA fighter Donald Williams, who was there in George Floyd Square on May 25th as Derek Chauvin held his knee on George Floyd's neck. Williams testified during the trial, and here's what he said about the verdict.
Your testimony had a big impact. It likely helped the jury convict Chauvin. So how do you feel about playing a role in bringing justice to George Floyd and his family?
Yeah, I feel excited, man, and I feel like a lot of weight is off my shoulder, that the family actually got justice for the murder of George Floyd, and that the world is, you know, starting to make a change and see that this shouldn't continue to happen.
And how were you able to use your MMA training to lend even more credibility to your testimony?
Just being able to tell the truth and, you know, explain and paint a picture to the world about what I actually seen and, you know, and what I was speaking on. And I believe my credibility in MMA and my profession actually helped out with this story a lot, because a lot of people didn't understand what blood chokes was.
And during your testimony, when the recording of George Floyd's life was being taken, was replayed, you got emotional. So what was going through your mind as you rewatched that?
Yeah, it was very touching and heartbreaking, because I have not watched the videos, and I stay away from the media on that aspect, just for my own sake and just to stay focused on the story.
Definitely know it was hard to watch.
It was very, very emotional to relive that scene again in court.
Absolutely, we can definitely understand that. And do you think this verdict will be the beginning of changing the way that police interact with people of color?
Yes, I believe it will, and I hope that change continues to happen after this, because that's what we need, is change.
I can't agree more with you on that. And I want to thank you for joining us this morning, Donald. And, you know, just thank you. That's all I can really say.
Our thanks to Michael and Donald Williams for that conversation. And for nearly a year, George Floyd's death and the outcry after has sparked anxiety and stress in communities regularly traumatized by racism. Joining me now for more on the health impacts on that is the director of the University of Connecticut's Health Disparities Institute, Dr. Wisdom Powell. Good morning, Dr. Powell. What do you think, or what do you see as the reaction from black communities today, hearing not only that Derek Chauvin was found guilty, but also now that the federal government will be investigating the Minneapolis Police Department for things like discriminatory practices if they find it?
So good morning, Diane. It's really good to be back. And I really appreciate the question. I think that the emotional fallout that we've been bearing witness to over these months, both the fallout related to the pandemic and the fallout related to racism, has taught us that we have a lot of work to do to repair the emotional and psychological injuries that these events have produced, particularly and especially among Black, Indigenous, and people of color. But I will add that I believe that many of us were absolutely emotionally relieved at the outcome of the verdict, and I think many communities will experience some degree of, you know, just restored sense of hope and also restored sense of meaning as a result of that verdict. But we have to be vigilant about the long-term implications, because the one mistake we can make in this moment is in believing that we have crossed this bridge and that there's no more work to do. We have healing justice work to do, restorative justice work to do, and that will take some time.
And Throughout the course of this trial, going into this trial, right, most of us saw the video of what essentially was George Floyd's death, what was his murder. Over the course of the trial, we then saw that video and so many others of this event over and over and over again. Now, that, of course, takes a mental toll. So now that at least that part of the trial is over, how do we go forward and take care of our mental health and make sure we all process, and particularly those in the Black community, process what we all just saw and how to properly move forward from that without just ignoring it?
Absolutely. Well, I think we all have to be willing to reach out and seek the kinds of supports that we know we need to heal. So it is really important that we find someone, some group, some supportive system that we can lean into in this moment. It's going to be really important for us to take stock of how the aftermath of these events are showing up in our emotional lives, paying attention to our sleep patterns, whether or not we're eating the ways we used to eat, whether or not we're enjoying the things that used to bring us joy. Because the way that trauma operates is that it can really not only fish your memory, but it also can fragment us in ways that leave us disconnected from the things that used to make us happy. And we have all been in a holding pattern for so long that it's really important that we take the time to take stock of our interior lives and all the ways that this tragic set of events has wreaked havoc. And here's the rub. It's not just the emotional, impacts, because we know that there's a clear association between racial trauma and depression, anxiety, and also behavioral health risk-taking. But we also know that racism gets beneath the in ways that can affect our health long term. So the most critical thing we can do is to make sure that we are connected to health systems, that we have a routine way of connecting with our primary care physicians. If we don't have one, we need to get one. And more importantly, we need to be paying attention to the emotional signs and symptoms.
All right, Dr. Wisdom Powell, always great to have you. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane.
And that does it for this ABC News Live update. I'm Diane Macedo. Thanks for joining us. And remember, ABC News Live is here for you all day with the latest news, context, and analysis. I'll see you back here at 3 p.m. Eastern with Terry Moran for The Breakdown. Have a great day.
Hi everyone, George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.